Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurial spirits, connect their creativity to their careers, and distinguish themselves from others. I'm your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps, who wishes the best for you in 2022 and is committed to bringing ease to insurance. Alps is the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. That means you have direct access to your insurance team, from account managers to claims attorneys. And Alps has the simplest, most straightforward online application out there. Qualifying firms can even apply, see rates, and bind coverage all in about 20 minutes. When it comes to continuing your coverage, Alps makes that easy too, with 100% online renewal. With Alps, you can spend less time insurancing and more time innovating. Get started at applyonline.alpsinsurance.com. That's applyonline.alpsinsurance.com. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a .1, you can help pay for the time it takes to create and edit Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the interview. Joel Oster practices constitutional law and runs Comedian of Law, a CLE company that uses humor to liven up its materials. He also hosts a podcast called Debriefing the Law. Joel, welcome to Lawyerpreneur.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, let's start with litigation, because I think that's going to help us set the table for this conversation. There's a very good plaintiff lawyer here in Birmingham, where I am, who I interviewed for my law blog several years ago about the importance of storytelling and delivering a narrative to, whether it's a jury or to a judge, to give them something to latch onto. It seems like you do that through at least one of your mechanisms being humor. Can you tell me about that?
Well, I'm a big believer in storytelling. We teach a class on legal writing, storytelling, and how I got to that position in my career really was where it dawned on me that's what I should do. Is I worked for this law firm in Orlando, Florida, and the partner at that law firm really liked to, if you had a 14,000 word brief, he expected to use 14,000 words on that brief. So if I handed him a brief that's 13,999 words, he would say, hey, this is one word too short. See what we can do. We got to maximize. And we would do all the tricks. Like before the word count, we would reduce the margins or expand the margins, reduce the line spacing, all those tricks. And I got to tell you, my briefs were crappy. I didn't like them. I thought I was writing the way that my boss liked it and the way he wanted to read it. Where you just do everything, you throw every argument in that you can, you just cram it in there. And then one day I decided, you know what? Forget all this. I'm just going to write the way I like to write. I'm going to look at these facts and just tell as compelling of a story as I can. And then all of a sudden, my boss said, I like this stuff. Your legal writing has really improved recently. What's gone on? And I thought to myself, I didn't tell him this. I said, well, I stopped writing to please you and started writing the way I thought was the most compelling way to tell this story based upon these facts. So then that totally changed my litigation career. Now, every time I approach a case, I look at the facts and I say, what's the story here? What is the winning story, the compelling argument that's really going to move people to my client's side? And so it was that epiphany that I had that really kind of changed my entire approach to law.
So at what point in your cases do you start looking at that? I mean, is it when you get ready to brief an issue, or is it something you're looking for all along?
Well, obviously all along. You do it again every single time you brief a case. Like if I'm doing an appellate argument and I'm going to look at the facts and say, okay, what is the most compelling way I can tell this story? And I'm going to organize my brief that way. So that way I am, presenting it to the court in a way that I think it tells a compelling story. And here's the other reason why you do that, Jeremy, and I'm sure you know this. Have you ever read a book and you said to yourself, man, I wish I could have, that book could have turned out differently? Like I have my kids read Where the Red Fern Grows. I don't know if you ever read that. I read it when I was in 5th grade. I read it to my boys when they were in 5th grade. In the book, the dogs die. Very similar to Old Yeller. At the end, Old Yeller dies. If I were writing the last chapter of those books, the dog is not dying. He's on some chicken parts farm right now, living in the high life. And the beauty of your legal story is who gets to write the last chapter. It's the judge. The judge gets to write that last chapter, so the dog does not have to die. And so you definitely do it every time you write a brief. At the same time, at the beginning of the case, you also got to look at the compelling storylines, because you need to develop those storylines through depositions, through discovery. Now, obviously, you got to be flexible because things will change. You'll learn things that you really, that's actually where the story is. That is the hook right there, where this lawsuit is going to live or die. So you will change your approach throughout the proceedings. But I start from the very beginning with, what is the story here? How can I tell this as a story? But then you do it anew every time you write the brief.
So where does humor come into this for you?
Well, humor is one of those things where, to me, it is the spice of life. I teach this class called, Using Humor in Law. I'm very clear that, look, one of the big kickbacks to using humor is no one will treat you seriously. You're a big jokester, ha ha, laugh. If you can't ever be serious, then so you shouldn't use humor. Well, if that's your objection, you kind of miss my point. My point is, humor is the spice. So it's not the main course. If you come over to my house and I'm going to feed you some brisket, I live in Kansas City, we're going to smoke some brisket. It's going to be delicious. I'm not feeding you the seasoning, right? The paprika, the cayenne pepper, the salt and pepper, garlic, whatever. I'm not feeding you the seasoning. I'm feeding you the actual brisket. Same is true with your argument. The humor is the spice. It just kind of, spices up your argument, makes it more receptive. And I have found that if you're talking all the way from the very beginning of trial, opening statement, deposition, or interviewing witnesses, closing argument, to the appeals work, humor plays a role in it. I mean, people love laughter, and you can use laughter and humor to really drive your points home. I mean, the greats do this. Clarence Darrow, Abraham Lincoln, John Marshall is known for using humor to, get the other justices to go along with him so he could get, commanding majorities at the Supreme Court. That was back in the early 1800s. And so to me, humor is how you approach doing law, that really spices it up and makes the listener receptive to your winning arguments.
Yeah, I was going to say along those lines that, when we see litigation on TV and movies, it's almost always, like, aside from My Cousin Vinny, it's a stiff and rigid event. But that hasn't been my experience. The best lawyers that I've tried cases with and against are able to break the tension, especially during voir dire, when you're asking the jury like 6,000 questions, to just try to relate to them and get them to relate to you by using humor. So, I know that when you start off with litigation, you're really, or at least I was really uncomfortable with the process, even though, I taught high school for 6 years before going to law school and was used to being in front of people. But you have to get acclimated to the process. So how did you get comfortable with humor and, sprinkling in the spice there during trial when it's not necessarily what people are expecting to encounter?
Well, first of all, that's just kind of who I am. I would teach CLEs for lawyers, not doing what I'm doing now, but in my previous life, we'd hold these conventions, bring lawyers in, we'd teach them constitutional law. And after I got done presenting, people usually didn't come up to me afterwards and say, hey, thanks for the great legal advice. You're going to make us a ton of money now. It was usually, oh, wow, you're funny. So I realized it's kind of like my natural disposition. So really, it's just kind of realizing, take those shackles off. If you can use humor naturally, that's who you are, then go ahead and use those in litigation. Again, you can't get to the point where you do too much, but there's a lot of different rules to using humor. For example, and Jeremy, I would highly recommend you do this. I'd recommend all your listeners do this. Go to a comedy club on open mic night and just try your stuff out. It's about 3 minutes to 5 minutes. And I'm telling you, you haven't lived until you've been in a room full of drunk college kids trying to get them to laugh. I mean, your pulse is just beating. I have argued before Judge Calabresi in the Second Circuit. Yeah, that it was nothing compared to being in a room full of drunk college kids trying to get them to laugh. And so I say that because every word you say it with intentionality. Like, how can I drop this word here to get a laugh response? And so that I think that's great training. And then when you're up, in front of the court, one of the things I teach in my oral argument class is, you're looking directly in the court's eyes. You're communicating with the court. And then when opportunities for humor come up, you let it flow in and naturally. That's kind of who you are. And again, there's a lot of different ways you can be humorous. One of them, this is unfortunately, a common trigger point for laughter is shock. And so if you're at the comedy club, they call that blue humor, where you're using raunchy jokes, sex jokes to get people to laugh. Yeah, that's the number one rule in court. No inappropriate jokes. So if that's how you get people to laugh, you got to leave that one at home. That's going to fall on its face. So as long as you don't do that, you should be fine. To try to use humor, as long as it comes out naturally. Oh, here's another tip, Jeremy. Also, never preface your joke in court with this, saying, "Oh, here's a funny one." Because if you say that, now you're pre-announcing this is a joke. If you don't pre-announce it so they don't know it's a joke, all you have done is told an interesting story. You moved right along. No one laughed. Who cares? You told an interesting story. You made your point.
Do you have a war story you can share with us about a humorous moment in court, with whether it's judge or jury, that was effective for what you were trying to accomplish?
I don't have one that I remember off the top of my head, though there have been a lot of cases. It's usually more off the cuff. A couple of them that just came off that I will tell you about that I saw. There was a Supreme Court case just this 2 terms ago. It was called, it was a Kansas case. And I forget the first name on the case. It might come to me as I'm telling the story. But the issue was the cops stopped this person who was driving a car because the owner of the car's driver's license was suspended. So the cops ran their numbers through their computer. Apparently, texting and driving is a bad thing, but you can go ahead and run, people's driver's license and license plates through their systems while you're driving. Well, they stopped this car. They pull the car over under the suspicion that, hey, this is being driven by someone whose license is suspended. Well, how do you know that? It could be that the driver the owner lent his car to a son or a family member to drive since his license was suspended. So the issue was there probable cause that a crime had been committed such that you can pull this car over and do a Fourth Amendment stop? And so during oral argument, the Justice Gorsuch decides to impersonate a Kansas police officer by doing a New York accent. I'm going, what? You're impersonating this is in Kansas, a Kansas police stop by doing, I would butcher right now if I even attempted it, but if you can do your worst, my cousin Vinny impersonation, like some kind of Brooklyn accent with a bunch of Utes, that's what Gorsuch did. This lawyer on the fly told Gorsuch right to his face, this is Kansas, not New York. Oh. And I'm telling you, the audience just erupted in laughter. It was hilarious that she was so quick-witted. She caught it and then made her point. I mean, she scored some points there with she made her point. I don't know if she won the case based upon that, but nonetheless, it was a funny moment. Another example of where it actually happened in front of a jury was, you remember the O.J. Simpson trial, right? One of the famous lines from the O.J. Simpson trial was, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Well, there was another trial afterwards involving this person who had really baggy pants. So they found these pants and they thought these pants belonged to the defendant, but they were baggy pants. And so the defense ran with this theory of, look, these pants don't fit, you must acquit. Well, the prosecution was having none of it and said, look, I don't know why the pants were baggy. Maybe he wears them down to his, past his butt, and he is pulling them up and had to hold him up. That's why the police were able to catch him. He could not run that fast. But here's the bottom line. If the pants don't fit, I don't give a, and then I don't know how your podcast is rated,
yep.
But it got a lot of laughter from the jury, and he definitely scored his points with that line.
Well, and then, of course, there are the funny things that naturally arise out of having a room full of strangers stuck together in a somewhat uncomfortable situation. When I had a case, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. We were trying in Talladega, Alabama, for NASCAR fans. The Talladega Superspeedway is there. And we're in the middle of voir dire, and all of a sudden, one of the jurors just gets up and starts walking out of the back of the courtroom, just in the middle of things. And the judge stops him and says, "Sir, where are you going?" And he says, "Judge, I got to pee." And so the judge says, "Let the record reflect that the gentleman has to pee." And so then we pause because we have to wait till he gets back. And we finish voir dire. The judge is telling all the jurors, giving them some instructions that they're going to go out for lunch. And after lunch, we'll select the jury. And all the jurors are headed out the back except for this same guy. He comes up to the front, puts his juror badge down on the bench, and just starts walking away. And the judge says, "Sir, what are you doing?" And he says, "I got things to do." And the judge was not entertained anymore. And he said, "Sir, let me be really clear to you with what's going to happen. If you're not in the first row when we get back from lunch, I'm going to send a sheriff to your house and pick you up and bring you back." The guy doesn't get his juror badge. He just keeps walking. But when we get back from lunch, he is where he was supposed to be.
Wow. Did that guy was he selected as a juror?
No, nobody wanted him. In fact, as soon as he cleared the back doors on his way out, the judge says, "Y'all are going to strike that guy, right?" So, he was struck before we ever got back from lunch, and there was no need for him to be back other than the judge making his point.
Exactly. You can't set the bad precedent, right? Boundaries here.
That's right. All right. So you have written a book on weird cases and lawyer behavior. That book is called UnDue Process. Tell us about that.
Well, during my my second career, if you will, I teach lawyers and CLEs, and so I've been able to travel this nation. Of course, it's all pre-COVID, and the benefit of doing this, I get to hear and see all these crazy stories that lawyers have, and so crazy litigation stories. So this book is kind of a collection of all those stories, and then my observations of the funny, the outrageous, the crazy in the law, all the way from the institutions of law themselves to the United States Supreme Court. The entire gamut, we try to expose the good, the bad, and the funny of the law.
All right. So you've got a book, you've got a podcast, a CLE company, you teach, a law practice. Did you always have an eye toward entrepreneurship, or how did these things develop for you?
That is a fascinating question. I was trying to think through, how did I get to this point in my life? Because, I just crossed the center court line or the 50-yard line, whatever metaphor you want to use. I'm on the backside of 50 now. And my thought was, and my son is thinking about going to law school. And so what advice would you encourage your son to go to law school? How did the journey go? And there's a lot of different thoughts about it. And it might sound trite, cliche to say you follow your heart, but I think there's some truth there. Number one, we got to pay our bills. That's for sure, right? You graduate from law school, you got to pay your bills. But also, I believe that God has given us a desire to do things. We were all wired in certain ways, and so we should kind of pursue that. Whatever interests us and really captures us, what we would do for free, we should find a way to do that as a vocation and for a living. And so that's kind of the thought process that my brothers went down, and I wanted to do the same thing. And so here's the deal: I found that in myself, in my own, how I'm wired, if I had an opportunity to speak anywhere, I took it. You know what? You didn't have to pay me. I never asked for a payment. I would just, I got a chance to speak in front of a group. Let me do it. I'll go for it. I don't care what the venue is. I'll do it. That's just kind of what made me alive. And then when I was speaking in front of a group, and I've never done drugs, Jeremy, but I'm guessing that's what it felt like, because I was at a high. It's just like I was so pumped up. I would think about that performance, that speaking engagement for the next 5 days. It would wake me up at 3 a.m. in the mornings. I thought about, I delivered that one line and I got a good response. That really is what drove me. And so then the thought was, okay, well, that's what I like to do for free. how can I turn that into a career? Where is the money there? Now, we don't follow the money. It's kind of a bad adage to show me the money, but you get the idea. You got to pay your bills. So how can I take my passion, what I love to do, and then find some way to pay the bills and still pursue that passion? That's kind of what led me down this road of thinking, how can I create a career using comedy, allow me to be a public speaker, and also get paid at the same time?
All right. So people often ask me, how do you have time for all the other things you're doing, in addition to running a law practice? So let me ask you, how did you you make the time? It's an intentional choice, but how did you make the time, and what gave you the freedom to pursue these other avenues of, podcasting and speaking and a CLE company in addition to the law practice?
Yeah, no, that's real life stuff. What you just said right there. That's absolutely real life stuff, because you can have a passion, you can have a dream. You only have one life to live. Your kids are only young one time in their life. You're not going to take all 24 of your hours to pursue your vocation because you have other things to do. So you only have a limited amount of hours. How do you have time to pursue your entrepreneurial ideas, your passion, whatever? It sounds nice, Joel, but come on. That's not real life stuff. And I totally agree with that. It probably took me about 5 years to find the right time to do this. And looking back on it, could I have just leapt out on year one and just did this? Well, yeah, I guess I could have, but man, you learn along the way. I mean, this wasn't exactly profitable the first couple of years. And so, things happen. I looked for opportunities in my career, in my, finances, to find that period of time where I could take 2 years to just try this out, just to see what would happen. And that opportunity came up through just good fortune, I guess. I was able to buy, some property in Orlando, Florida. This is back in 2004, pre-hurricanes. The hurricanes came in at double the price of all those properties. So I was sitting on about 4 properties that I knew had some equity in them. So then I thought, you know what? I kind of believe in myself. Why not take now? I'm going to sell those 4 houses. What am I holding on to them for? I'm going to sell them, give myself 2 years here to try to make a go at this. At that same time, I was senior litigation counsel for this firm. And, you're making good money as a senior litigation lawyer. And I knew that my company wanted to move to back to their home office. So they had a home office in another state. They wanted to kind of close all their regional offices. I kind of knew that. So I took that as an opportunity. And I went to them and I said, hey, look, I know you want to kind of go back to bring everyone back to the home office. Why not let me just be out here in Kansas City part-time for a year? Allow me to kind of build up my next phase of my life. I'll still litigate for you during this time, but that gives me my transition time that I need. And obviously it was a huge reduction in pay, but it gave me enough to launch the next phase of my career. So that's a long way to just answer to say this. You just got to look for opportunities and just kind of figure where how can I set this up? And then you got to believe in yourself and then just leap off the bridge, or I don't know what the right, maybe that's a horrible metaphor to say, but nonetheless, take your chance, on yourself. And it's risky.
But it wasn't just a blind leap, because you gave yourself a runway. So you didn't just quit and said, okay, here goes nothing. You gave yourself an opportunity to succeed over the course of time. So at the end of that 2 years that you gave yourself, what did things look like at that point?
Yeah, so exactly. And I thought this through too. It's like when you are trying to start off on something, be an entrepreneur, you want to start your own business. You also have to have a realistic self-assessment of do I have the talent to do this? Is this within my skill set? Right. I mean, if I had said, hey, look, I want to be a comedian. That's what I want to do. I want to do stand-up comedy for lawyers, but I had never been to a comedy club. I hate speaking. I thought, well, I might try speaking to see if I can make people laugh. No, that's probably not the time to do that. You have to make sure you actually have the skill set first, right? To do that. So I knew I had the skill set. So that wasn't the issue. I needed time. I thought, 2 years is enough time for me to pursue this. Because, you make your plans on what you think is going to happen. I still have my original plans as I look back on them. It's comedy material in and of themselves. It's so funny. What I thought was going to be the path and what ended up being the path that I took. But you don't know those things until you're in the game. So once you're in the game and then obstacles come up, say, how am I going to get over this particular obstacle? What do I got to do here to take advantage of this opportunity? You do that on the fly as you're moving. But I knew I had the skill set. I knew this was a business model where there was money in this business, to be had. And so I gave myself 2 years to do it. And at the end of the 2-year period, I will just say I was actually better off financially than if I just stayed in my current position. And so it actually does, at least in my situation, I ended up being much better off financially. And here's also the thing, Jeremy, I don't know if I even should say this online, but man, I have a lot of free time. I mean, you started off with maybe a week's vacation, and then you go to maybe 2 weeks vacation. I have about 7 months of vacation a year where I just don't work. We take cruises, we do trips and things like that because we work really hard during the other times of the year. And it allows me to have that flexibility to take all this time off. I just turned 50. And I kind of feel like I'm already kind of semi-retired because we have all these plans to take trips now. We're empty nesters. And so I'm very glad I took that gamble.
Well, I spent the first hour of my day today putting time entries into the computer. So I feel really good about my life choices right now.
Oh, that's what drove me out of the law. Oh, my goodness. I cannot stand time entries. I always make fun of the 0.1 hour lawyer. They bill in 0.1 hours. How do you have time to do work when you're billing every 6 minutes of your life? I don't get it.
Well, as an insurance defense lawyer, that's what I've been doing for the last 9 years. And so we can have a very lengthy, dull conversation about that if you want. All right. So
wow.
In the beginning,
I am impressed though.
All right. In the beginning, before you had an audience and when the going was tough, I'm sure there were days that it was dark and did not look hopeful. What kept you going?
Well, obviously, necessity is the mother of all invention. I knew I was already in this. I was invested, had some skin in the game. I had no choice but to be successful. So you just plow ahead. And I almost am blessed by being the eternal optimist. I know it could be a bad thing. I think my Nebraska Cornhuskers are going to win the national championship every single year. We haven't been to a bowl game in 5 years, but I can articulate to you how we're going to win the national championship next year. I'm not delusional, but that's kind of what you have to do. I mean, you just got to, you know what? I know this is successful, and you just plow ahead, and you just got to push yourself through the trying times. And I don't even feel stressed. That is a benefit that I have. I know times are stressful. I just have this faith that God's going to work things out. He didn't bring me this far to just leave me out hanging high and dry. I think to honor that, you also have to be willing to work hard. Right. You can't just simply say, oh, you know what, the future is going to take care of itself. And so I don't have to work. No, you still got to work and put in the time and effort. If you're a litigator, you know what that means. That means if I have a class the next day or if I have a brief due the next day and it's not ready, I'm working till 4 a.m. in the morning to get that brief done, to get that class ready, because you just got to put in the time. You just can't, you don't have the option of saying, I'm not going to do this. So I really think it's this. I'm even talking to my kids about this right now. It's like, how do you actually plow ahead when you have a dream that you want to pursue? Sometimes in life, you just got to put one step in front of the next and just keep moving forward. And I call it the falling forward technique, where I really have no idea what I am doing, but I'm going to fall forward. I assume, are you a football fan? You're from Alabama,
absolutely.
So you got to be a football fan. Yeah, let's not get started on your coach. I can't stand him. But that's just because he's so successful.
Well, look, I'm from Texas,
nonetheless,
though,
you understand
Texas
the falling
fan.
forward.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, I'm a Texas fan, so it's been much harder
I cannot
for
stand
us.
both of your teams.
Yeah, that's fair.
If you were to ask me before this podcast, Joe, what are the two football teams you despise the most? It would be Texas and Alabama, not in that particular order. They're both 1 and 1A as far as teams I cannot stand. But nonetheless, for different reasons. Alabama is extremely successful. Texas is just so arrogant. They don't care, but that's a whole other issue. I love football.
Yes.
But nonetheless, what was I talking about?
We were talking about falling forward.
Yes. So football. So you watch football. You know what I'm talking about. When you get the ball and you're going through the line, it is an art to know how to fall so you still gain 2 yards on the fall. So even though you got tackled, it was an unsuccessful play in a large part, you still are 2 yards closer to your goal. Marcus Allen ended his career as the Kansas City Chiefs player, started as an Oakland Raiders player. He was masterful at knowing how to fall forward. That's what I do. I have my career path is filled with all kinds of failures. But every time I go through a venture, I'm learning something. I am falling forward and learning. Okay, I'm not going to do that one again. And I'm telling you, Jeremy, I've had some huge failures during my time, and sometimes colossal failures. I almost should write a book on just the huge failures. But I think that you learn something from those failures. You learn what not to do next. And also some of my successes, I got to tell you, they're due from just being lucky, being in the right place at the right time. Well, Jeremy, if I had not started, I would never have been in the right place at the right time. I would have been on the sidelines, right? Wishing I was in the game. You got to be in the game to take advantage of being in the right place at the right time.
All right. I love the idea of you writing a book about failing forward. If that book doesn't exist, it needs to, because there is such, despair around failure and shame, and people don't want to talk about it. But there can also be hope that arises out of failure. And I think that it can absolutely propel you forward. And if you end up closer to where you want to be than where you were when you started, I just think that it can be an absolutely hopeful experience if you allow it to be.
Oh, I agree. That is, you got to have a little bit of thin skin, because sometimes failure is not fun to endure, but it is one step closer. I know it sounds like a cliche, but man, it was true. It has been true in my life.
Well, I think that this has been a very optimistic and hopeful conversation, which is great because that's how you describe yourself. I think you've given people a lot to think about. So where can people find or follow you to find out more information about what you're doing?
All right, so it's comedianoflaw.com. My name is Joel Oster. The big joke that I always give, and it never fails to work, is this. I'm sorry if you were misled when you saw my name. You thought, oh, I can't believe this guy's going to come talk. No, I'm not Joel Osteen. I am Joel Oster. Here's why I say that. When you look for my podcast, you'll type in my name, Joel Oster. You will have to scroll past the first 2 pages, which will all be Joel Osteen's podcast. I'm not him. I know you have listeners here. They won't be able to get this joke, but TV does not subtract 50 pounds or add Elvis Presley hair. I look nothing like Joel Osteen, but nonetheless, you'll find my podcast. Again, it's Joel Oster, or it's comedianoflaw.com.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy.
If you've enjoyed the show, you can support it by rating it on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you're listening, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. You can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.